It is time for us to talk business. One of the most exciting moments of my day. Business Express 981 is live, and I'm not alone. My name is Valentine, who, by the way, you're welcome to Smooth 98.1. And in time, Mustapha Alao, our guest on the show, and Rotus, our business analyst and host. Good morning, Rotus. Welcome.
Good morning, Valentine. Good morning, Lagos. Good morning, Mustapha.
Good morning,
Hi, Mustapha.
everyone. Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, Mustapha. Please increase your volume a little bit. Mustapha is a business analyst at ARM and proudly partners on the show, Business Express 981. Please join the conversation by sending us messages through WhatsApp 0809-444-0981. That's for messages. You can watch on YouTube live. We're live now on youtube.com/smooth981FM Lagos, or simply type in the search box Smooth FM Lagos. Join, watch, subscribe, leave a comment. Rotus?
Yeah, thank you. So we got inflation figures yesterday, and we saw a deceleration. We saw, in fact, let me even start with month on month with the figures that we got month on month. So 0.97% in April, from 1.56% in March. That's headline inflation. This is month on month. Food inflation 0.99%, down from 1.9% in March. Core inflation 0.99% from 1.06. Even on a year-on-year basis, so at 18.17 in March, I think we fell to 18.12. I think it was about a 5 basis point drop. And then 22.95 in food inflation, 22.95 in March, fell to 22.72 or so. And then core inflation went up. Mustapha, were you surprised by the deceleration?
Yes. I hope you can hear me clearly, first of all.
Yes.
We can.
Yes. I would say I was slightly surprised. This is Nigeria's first drop in inflation since the land border closure back in 2019. And this could indicate that inflation has reached, you could say, some sort of peak in March when it reached the levels that it was. Looking at the bigger picture, though, it might not necessarily signal an ease in the effects of rising inflation or of high prices and so on. It could just be likely the fact that people aren't spending because costs are too exorbitant, and producers and vendors are, responding accordingly by, reducing the prices of their goods. So it might not necessarily be because some, very positive impacts of some policies that are being implemented are actually reducing the effect of inflation itself. So it could just be that. And the CBN, to combat this effect of, higher cost of sugar and wheat in the international markets, they announced plans to place FX restrictions on these commodities, wheat and sugar, just recently. So this effort, which was intended to spur local production, could lead to higher prices, theoretically and practically in most cases, of these commodities, especially in the interim. We also know that food prices have increased, notably since Ramadan began. Ramadan just ended, and we know that a lot of these northern farmers, they are predominantly Muslim, and that could also impact the prices of food. So over the last month, everything points to there being higher inflation in April. So I would say that, yes, I am slightly surprised that despite all of this, we're still seeing that drop. But I would say, maybe it's just us reaching a peak, and it could just be because producers are just responding by selling less because people are not buying as much.
Great stuff. What about core inflation? At least on a year-on-year basis, we saw that rise. I think 12.64 or so. Anything to look for there? Is it energy, or what's the story with core inflation?
Well, core inflation, because we know that everything ties into each other. Even food inflation and core inflation ties into each other. Like I said, if we're just looking at the numbers, right? Or we're seeing that inflation came down to 18.12% in April. Also, that means inflation is now getting better. I think we should look at the bigger picture. Inflation is still high. I think that's what we should look at. Inflation is still high, and it's the same drivers. We're seeing because food is more expensive, and energy costs are more expensive. That's trickling down into rising cost of transportation. We're seeing that, especially over the last month or so, we're seeing COVID-19 cases increasing in the globe, in India, for example, and that's trickling down to other economies, and people are being a bit more, cautious and probably purchasing even more masks, more hand sanitizers, more medicine, and so on and so forth. And also, even just looking at the weather conditions that we are in now, a lot of people are falling sick, and leading to rising pharmaceutical products and so on. And people are still enacting COVID-19 restrictions in a lot of places, like airlines, for example. They're still using COVID-19 restrictions, and all these things still contribute to the higher cost of transportation, medical services. Excuse me. We also know that there's the higher cost of electricity tariff. So all these contributed to the higher core inflation.
Thank you. What does this now mean for the sorry about that. What does this mean for the MPC meeting next week? Does this mean is it steady as she goes? What do you think what happens next week?
Well, we know that the MPC, they've, despite the rise in inflation, they've always maintained this this pro-growth stance. We're trying to revive the economy, we're trying to allow cheap credits to the economy so that people can borrow more, can be encouraged to borrow more, and then we can have better economic activity, which will help us, climb out of the rebels that we got into, especially in 2020. This decline in the inflation number as published, let me put it that way, could just be another form of excuse for them to say that, whilst we're trying to do this pro-growth stance, despite rising inflation, now look, inflation has now come down. So I guess, this gives us even more headroom to stick to the, pro-growth stance that we maintain for a while. So I think, my expectation is that we'll still see the MPC maintain this pro-growth stance and still maintain the MPR rates at a dovish, more accommodative stance.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Mustapha. There are comments in here. Benga Kamu is first to send this one. It says, I don't understand the rationale of the CBN seeking to ban wheat and other commodities. Insecurity has disrupted food growing and supply, but for Uncle Murphy, this is the time to boost local production. Will he go to the farm himself? And then he says, comments on your analysis. So your analyst is very good and scoring home runs with ease. Thank you, Benga. And that's for you, Mustapha. Frank says, my problem with this seemingly decelerating inflation is that CBN may not be too relaxed to rein in on inflation, I guess is what he meant. And Benga adds that as for inflation figures, those things are far from reality. Do you agree?
Musta, thank you for your messages. Thank you. I always appreciate the messages from our listeners. Musta, what does this mean for real rates of return on investments for our listeners and folks who use ARM stock trade, for example, to invest? What does this signal? Still the same pressures?
Well, yes, absolutely. Like I said, let's not focus too much on the decrease in the points, in the percentage points. Let's just look at it that inflation is still high, and all the factors, all the triggers that could possibly make it even higher are still very prevalent and still very much there. And we could even see higher inflation by May, and when we look at May figures. So yes, the real rates of return, the negative real rates of return is still an issue that will still be there. And although we are seeing, positive, yields trajectory in the fixed income markets, but when we put that against the current situation of inflation in the country, it's almost not having much of an impact. But investors, they are demanding for better yields, from the governments, even in the PMAs and so on. So we'll see that, easing up in the fixed income space. That's bullish. However, with the way things are in the country, the negative rate of return will still be something that will be there, and still a pressure, like you put it, that will be prevalent.
Thank you. Governments and labor. I mean, labor. We talked yesterday about their strike in Kaduna. That one is, another issue. But government and labor are still, at least at the federal level, discussing this deregulation of fuel. And so there's still I don't know who's going to win this in the end. Is that still another headwind for possible pressure on inflation or trigger down the line?
Yes, absolutely. Because we need to look at a number of factors. This deregulation issue is something that is long overdue. Governments in the past should have done it, but because the reality of Nigeria does not allow for that, the deregulation is an ideal situation, but you can't force an ideal situation into, or you can't force an ideal solution into a non-ideal situation. And the non-ideal situation in this example is Nigeria. So while the idea of a deregulation sounds good, Nigeria does not have the fiscal buffers to be able to afford that. If we deregulate the industry now, for example, right now, crude oil prices are between $65 and $70. Nigeria in reality, or Nigerians in reality, cannot afford a cost-based price if we're going to sell petroleum products, at a fair rate. We just cannot. We'll just not be able to afford it, right? So because of this reality, we need to realize that, okay, yes, whilst the deregulation might be good in the long term, Nigerians cannot afford it at this point. So that's what the government is trying to battle with. They're trying to make sure that, oh, listen, whilst we know that deregulation is important, we know that subsidy is spiking and it's really affecting our numbers. At the same time, we need to sort of curb the prices of petroleum products so that Nigerians wouldn't starve. Nigerians wouldn't just die of starvation because you cannot afford it. So that's what the government is trying to deal with. Ideally, the government would like to, just deregulate the industry, and make people happy in the long term. But at the same time, they're trying to also take into consideration the labor and people and what they can afford in reality.
It seems like it's in good light. It's with good intention in terms of putting up subsidies to just, for lack of a better term, to ameliorate the pains of Nigerians. But people have been alleging that has aided corruption, especially for the key players in that sector. And that's why there have been calls for private sector involvement, especially with deregulating the not downstream, but upstream sector of petroleum industry. Henry Manuel has this message on WhatsApp. He says, I always like to remind people that deceleration in inflation does not mean prices are coming down. It just means that prices are increasing at a reduced rate. And that's a good thing.
Correct. Finally, okay, just a minute to go, Mustapha. You mentioned yields going up. A good portfolio mix right now. Are we also definitely including equities along with the fixed income and money market?
Yes, absolutely. It's always good to have a good portfolio mix. Not just sticking to the traditional fixed income space, but also mixing in equities, and especially with the way the global economy is now, even mixing in other assets, commodity, real estate, ETFs, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the equities, what I would say is that yes, it's good to involve them, but it's good to look at a multitude of factors, especially in the climb that we are at the moment. Looking at things like what has a good dividend yield, what is a fundamentally sound stock, and so on and so forth. Because if we look at the context of where we're coming from, which is 2020, Nigeria's equities market was one of the best performing markets in the world. And we know that when the market reaches a level, we're expecting a dip, right? So just put it in basic and simple form, right? So in light of that, one should be wary and look for fundamentally sound stocks and look for stocks that have good dividend yield. And this would, allow us to put healthy balance and healthy equity stocks into our portfolio.
Fantastic. And of course, www.armstocktrade.com. That's where you guys can pick up those investment options with ARM's website. Do it on the go, on your mobile phone, at home, on your laptop. Mustapha Alao, analyst with ARM Securities. Mustapha, thank you so much for joining us to talk about inflation and all the other matters. And everybody out there, thank you for your messages. Val, appreciate you as always.
I appreciate
Thank
you
you
always.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mustapha.
Thank you very much.
And special thanks to Yinka Bolu and Nedu, whose messages we couldn't take for lack of time. Stay here with us in Smooth. If you missed any part of this conversation, please always go back to YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Just type Smooth FM Lagos in the search box, and you can watch here on Smooth 98.1.
On Smooth 98.1, brought to you by AR.